Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and Chag Sameach. Today is the final day of Pesach. It's a day when we look forward to the future. And on this day, and in the presence of this beautiful, multi-generational congregation, I want to talk about strength. I want to talk about what it means to be strong, what it means to embrace our strength, and what it means to use our strength in the most positive and appropriate way possible. This morning's Haftarah describes, as Rabbi Schweber said earlier, this beautiful utopian vision where the rulers are going to fear God appropriately, are going to judge people justly, where animals that ordinarily hunt each other are going to somehow get along, and where a child is going to be leading them, this beautiful spirit of justice and peace and everybody getting along. But what's interesting to note is the context for this vision of Isaiah, because if you turn back one chapter and we read a portion of it, what happens before is that Isaiah's compatriots defeat the Assyrian enemy. They stand up strong against the Assyrians who were looking to conquer as many nations as possible, and they are successful at defeating the Assyrians. Peace and coexistence and the child leading the wolf and the lamb are possible, but not if we are defeated by a nasty enemy that does not wish us well. I want to speak this morning about the importance of embracing strength, the importance of embracing what the Kabbalists, the Jewish mystics, spoke of as Netzach. Netzach means victory. Sometimes Jewish people look at words like strength and power and victory through a lens that has been tinged by our own persecution. We have been on the receiving end of other people misusing their strength. We have been on the receiving end of other people misusing their power in order to discriminate us against us and to put us down. But power and strength, and yes, Netzach, victory, are necessary if we are to achieve the kinds of equality and justice and peaceful coexistence and even celebration that we crave and that we need and that we deserve as human beings. I think it is interesting and heartwarming that many people across the ideological spectrum are embracing the leadership of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Interesting that people across the political spectrum are recognizing and celebrating his show of strength. This is somebody who clearly identifies himself as a Jewish person leading a major Western nation, and rather than backing down, demonstrating how important it is to step up and use power appropriately in order to fight back. And I want to quote to you a passage that was written in an article by Ruth Vissa, a scholar taught at Harvard University for many years. She said that Zelensky is modeling the tenacity that needs to be demonstrated in order to support and in order to protect ideals of freedom and justice. Here's what she wrote. In fighting tenaciously, Ukraine has greatly advanced the cause of liberty, reminding what free nations owe one another and how they ought to be paying greater attention to the protection of their own. President Zelensky has personally delivered that message to the United States, Great Britain, the European Union, the United Nations, recalling to each the unprovoked attacks it faced. Americans at Pearl Harbor and the British in the London Blitz. So she is raising up his leadership and saying, without that kind of leadership, all of the values that we prize, freedom and democracy and equality and justice, they are not going to survive unless we have the courage, the strength to fight back. In Kabbalah, the concept of netzach, of victory, is in relationship with chesed, which means love and kindness and outreach. So one is a kind of pushing back and the other is a kind of embracing. And they need to be in harmony with each other. The modern state of Israel is blessed to have power and strength. That is not something that we should apologize for. When I speak with younger people about Israel, I sometimes find that they struggle with Israel's power, and they struggle to understand how it is that Israel uses and should use her power. And I will say that I find myself pushing back in different conversations depending on which direction people are coming from. And this is true when I speak to people of all ages about Medinat Yisrael. When people seem not to be sufficiently mindful of the importance of Israel demonstrating and using her power, I introduce into the conversation discussion of the very real existential dangers that Israel faces. And I invite people into conversation about Jewish history, about what it means for the Jewish people to have a place where they have sovereignty, where they have influence, where they can push back and defend themselves appropriately. And in the other direction, when I'm in conversation with people who don't seem to be sufficiently mindful of the need for Israel to exercise her power responsibly, I introduce that into the conversation. Not everything is an existential threat. How will Israel balance her own needs with the legitimate needs of those who also have a narrative and who also need to be recognized? So netzach, victory, strength, these are not bad words. These are important concepts, but we need to use our strength towards a victory that ultimately allows for democracy and justice and equality to thrive. As Vissa and others have pointed out, Ukraine is a country where people are embraced despite their diversity. Diversity in terms of religion and ethnicity and gender and sexuality. That is unusual in that particular region of the world, and those are values that are worth fighting for. When I was in Israel years ago, the Rabbinical Assembly had a conversation with Shimon Peres, president at the time, may he rest in peace, Alav HaShalom, and he addressed us and he said, a sign of a nation's strength is the extent to which it fulfills the needs of and protects the rights of its most vulnerable. So strength is not just a self-defining and self-perpetuating concept. Strength needs to be in the service of chesed, of outreach, of peace, of justice, and even of love. And I want to just take a moment to describe how important that is for us as individuals. So obviously, we may on some level prefer not to engage in certain kinds of conflicts, but sometimes we have to engage in those conflicts. We may have people at our workplace, we may have people in our families that are bullies, that are truly trying to impose their will on everyone else. And we see it in different ways. And there might be a part of us that says, okay, we'll live with it. We've lived with it long enough. That's not a good thing. Sometimes we need to push back. We need to step up. We need to use our own influence, our own power, if you will, our own strength. Years ago, I was teaching at summer camp. And there was one student who was absolutely bullying another student. And this other student was socially awkward, and he definitely was taking advantage of him and making fun of him in all kinds of ways. And I called him out for it in that particular setting during class. And afterwards, I took him aside and I said, let's talk about him and his situation. And let's figure out how you can engage with him in a way that is more appropriate, more the kind of person that you know that you should be. Now, I was in the position of authority. Sometimes we're not in the position of authority, but I'm encouraging all of us to find our inner strength. There are people in our lives that are trying to overpower us. And we can't let that happen. Whether we see ourselves as outgoing or introverted, whether we embrace conflict or shy away from conflict, we cannot let in our personal lives other people say to us that it's their way or the highway. We cannot continue to live like that, and we should not continue to live like that. Towards the end of the service, we're going to have the prayers of Yizkor. We're going to ask God to remember the people who walked this earth, who were dear to us, whom we love, who are no longer physically present. And I want us, among other things, to turn to these people for examples and inspiration of strength. We have loved ones who in this world demonstrated what it means to stand up and even at times to push back, to use their strength appropriately. And so I want us to think about those moments, and I want us to try to draw some strength from their strength. As we are sitting with and invoking these memories, let's look to our loved ones, to our ancestors who are no longer here, as examples of an inspiration of the kind of strength that we need to invoke ourselves. So I want to conclude with a blessing, and it is a blessing that I offer with hope. We say the words, Adonai oz le'amo yitain, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. We say, may God bless us with strength. May God bless us with peace. Our ancestors understood that you can't get to peace if you don't appropriately use your strength. There is no good that comes from sitting on our strength and fearful of reaching out and speaking out. Strength appropriately used can lead to peace. The boy doesn't magically lead the wolf and the lamb, and justice doesn't magically well up like the sea. We have to bring that reality about. May God give us strength that ultimately leads to peace. Amen.